Okay, guess we're up and running again. Back-to-back days. Welcome to the Colonel and the Kid podcast. We're here, February 2nd, 2026. It's Groundhog's Day today. So, more on that later. But this is the Colonel and the Kid podcast. I'm your host, Greg Heitmann. Here I am, second day in a row, a little streak going. This is a podcast from my memoir that I've written about my grandfather, Lieutenant Colonel Edwin P. Hagen Jr., and that was my mom's dad. Grandpa, as I called him. He inspired me to write this and preserve some memories, have some laughs, record some of the information of the history of his life and how it intertwined with my life. And it's what I've said in the past, and I'll continue to keep probably repeating that like a broken record, is this is kind of my psychotherapy. Sort of how I cope. It's a coping mechanism for me to first write it down and now have it recorded on the video podcast through YouTube, and now also just an audio podcast. And I will say that I'm using the Riverside studio to accomplish my recording, video and audio today and in the past. And that's what I've been using, and I've subscribed to that. So it seems to be working okay. I did have a little problem today. I couldn't figure out what was going on, why I had two hosts going. I finally figured out that I was logged in on a different computer, and I finally got that shut down and able to just have myself doing the broadcast here as a host. I was trying to host it on two separate computers for a while. I was trying to use my Mac. Right now I'm using my MacBook, but I was going to try to use my Mac. So I had logged in and stuff, and the camera angle wasn't too good for that. So I decided to go back to the MacBook, and it was very confusing for a while because I had it on both cameras, and there was an echo going on, and it was really annoying there for a little bit, but I finally figured it out. So congratulations to me. So anyway, we got to chapter 24, episode 24 on the podcast today. And this one's called the State B Basketball Tourney. And it's a pretty short chapter, just one photo, I think, and maybe 500, 600 words. Get that read into the record and go forward. Got a couple other things, recurring segments I'd like to touch on today, but we'll get this chapter 24 read into the record and go on from there. So welcome to season 2, episode 4 of the Colonel and the Kid podcast. And this is chapter 24, the State B Basketball Tourney. We'll get that read into the record here, hopefully. Chapter 24, State B Basketball Tourney. And as usual, we start with a quote. Quote, "In basketball, as in life, true joy comes from being fully present in each and every moment, not just when things are going your way." End quote. And that's from Phil Jackson, famous basketball coach for the Chicago Bulls, LA Lakers. He was a champion, I think, on the New York Knicks way back in the early 70s. And I think he played at the University of North Dakota, if I remember right. They were the Fightin' Sioux back then. Phil Jackson, pretty big guy. I think he's about 6'7", 6'8", and kind of this guru, I guess, of a basketball coach. Pretty sure he's retired from basketball, but he was one of the all-time great coaches and champions all around. Coached Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal, just a pretty special person and coach there. And great quote to start the State B Basketball Tourney chapter. Let's dive in. Sports have always played a significant role in my life and my family's lives. 40-some years ago now, South Dakota had only 2 classes of basketball, Class A and Class B. Class A was the top 16 schools in South Dakota by enrollment, and Class B was all the rest. It was an annual event like no other, at least for me. Class A and Class B tournaments would rotate every year, with the A in Rapid City and the B in Sioux Falls, and vice versa the next year. When the Class B tourney was in Sioux Falls, it was like a family reunion. We would often get together with Grandpa and Grandma Hagen while staying with Aunt Kathy down in Sioux Falls. It was an exciting, amazing time during the State B tournament. This was the original March Madness for me. It was always fun seeing my cousins and playing with them. It was also spellbinding to see high school kids playing basketball on television. A couple of teams stick out in my mind: Armour and Webster. I didn't go to many of the state tourney games, which were played at the Sioux Falls Arena. I can vaguely recall sitting pretty high up watching a first-round afternoon session game featuring Armour. They were a powerhouse with an odd combination of brothers on the team: the Glanzers, Burnell and Barry. No, not as teammates, but as coach Burnell and star player Barry. That always stuck with me. Those Armour teams were from the late 1970s, before we moved to South Dakota. We lived in North Dakota at that time and traveled almost 500 miles to see family in high school basketball. And I add parenthetically that it struck me, I didn't have this in the chapter, but I'll just talk about it a little bit here real quickly, is that when I was in high school, our neighbors to the north of us, my parents' house in Groton High School, or Groton, South Dakota, and I went to Groton High School, but our neighbors happened to be a different brother of the Glanzer family. It was Bruce Glanzer, and he was the administrator for the nursing home in Groton. And I can't remember how long he lived there. A few years, I think, as our neighbor to the north. And he was a nice guy, real quiet and unassuming, and not too tall. I don't think the Glanzers, as a coach, and the Burnell and player Barry from the Glanzer, they played on the state championship team. I don't think they were very tall. I think they were guards and shooters and quick and agile player. And I just thought that was a pretty good addition that I should have probably included in the memoir itself. That my connection to the Glanzers, 10, 15 years later in life, turns out to be, it was one of the brothers was our neighbor. So I should have asked Bruce if he played on that team. He was probably that age. Maybe he played and was not a star like his brother Barry or the glamorous coach Burnell. But anyway, good addition to the chapter. Glad I remember that and was able to read that into the record and speak that into the record, at least. And it's funny because I had written it on my notes here on my printed copy, but I'm actually reading from a copy that's on my screen, and I was barely able to remember that. Just even though it was just a few minutes ago, I wrote that note on the piece of paper, but looking at this screen, there's no note there. So I feel lucky that I remembered to include that in the podcast here. But back to the chapter. Then there was Webster. Webster was a rival to my hometown high school of Groton. They were champions in the early 1980s. In 1982, Webster beat Crow Creek in the championship game. I remember that specifically because I had asked if I could go to the championship game, and the adults just laughed at me. It was sold out, and they were going, I could watch it on TV if I wanted. And I remember, I don't remember any of the players, but I remember that going to Webster, which is 30 miles to the east of Groton, where I grew up. And they were our Northeast Conference rivals when I was in high school, and a little later. And then that kind of fell apart later as some of this Webster, kind of the school, lost enrollment, and Northeast Conference kind of fell into disarray too, because a lot of the schools didn't have enough kids in school to play football. And so the conference kind of fell apart. But I remember back in the early 80s, and that team, they're pretty good. But the thing that strikes me the most that I remember is going over to they played in the Armory. That's where they played their high school basketball games. And there's a pretty big gym. And in that gym, they had a huge framed professionally taken photograph of that championship team. And it was very large and hanging on the wall there, and very, very professional. It looked pretty good, but still, it was done in the setting of like a studio setting of a photographer studio setting. So it had that weird purplish background, and that's always stood out to me that it seems such a dichotomy, just this diametrically opposed situation of this basketball team sitting down in front of this this background, this painted like high school photograph day background, and have that team sitting there organized when you think of basketball and the organized chaos of basketball, but then having them sit down for actual portrait for that championship team. It seems weird to me for some reason. It shouldn't be weird because it was a great accomplishment on their part. But then I compare it to like my high school yearbook basketball team photo. We're just standing there in front of the bleachers in our gym and get our picture taken in our uniforms. And it was a stark contrast to their professional seated group photograph. They were in their uniforms and everything. And with the coach, I think coach was wearing a suit and tie. And I just think that's it's just one of those memories that just I remember so distinctly for whatever reason. If I ever get back up to Webster, maybe I'll have to see if I can go into the armory and get a photograph of that just for posterity to include in the another edition of the memoir, an updated edition later on. So anyway, here's the only photograph I have of the chapter, and this is it's a combined photograph. There's two photographs with one caption, and what it is I'll read the caption here and then try to describe them a little bit. Caption reads, photo of the State B basketball programs from 1973 and 1974. Some interesting ephemera with an even more amazing example of inflation. One year, the official program is 25 cents, and the next year it doubles in price. So 50 cents. And in this case, it's kind of weird because this is the 1973, 1974 basketball tournaments, and both of these were in Sioux Falls. So as I remembered, I described earlier that they would rotate, and maybe Rapid City didn't have a big enough arena at that time. Maybe that was later when they started alternating after. I think Rapid City built like the Rushmore Plaza or Rushmore Center. Can't remember if that was the exact name of it. So maybe that was built a little later, and then they started alternating it. But so maybe both the state Class A and Class B tournaments were both in Sioux Falls during this time. But it was always like that beginning of the second week of March. That was when the state Class B basketball tournament was held. And these are the programs these are the official programs. My mom had saved them in file cabinet or something, and I got a hold of them a couple of years ago when I was after my dad had passed away and going through stuff, and came across these. And I have these someplace, and they're pretty cool. And I think I should have probably gone through and looked at. I think some of it was filled out of I could have looked and seen who the teams were in that played, and then talked about a little bit. But I don't remember these at all. 73 and 74. I was 4 and 5 years old, so I wouldn't have any memory of them. But I'm not even sure my parents went to these. Maybe my Grandpa Hagen might have had these programs and gave them to my mom. I'm not even exactly sure about that. So anyway, the programs are, just 39th annual and the 40th annual from the Class B tournament, and just interesting to look at. And I'll put these photos up on the video podcast if you want to look at them and see the actual picture of them. But kind of sorry I didn't open up and take some pictures of of the actual teams that played. So I think they actually had a bracket in there. So there's, oh, maybe I should explain a little bit too. This is back in the old days before they had sort of the seeding system that would match up the best teams throughout the state, no matter which conference or region you were in. Back in these old days, it was just you came out of your region. It was just geographic region. So you could have had the two best teams playing one region, and one team come out of there and not be able to see the two best teams in the whole state because they possibly could have been in the same district or region. The way it is now, they kind of have seeding and you're rated, and so that you may have to play all over the state so that they whittle it down into the two or the eight best teams that go to the actual tournament, and eight best play. And you could actually have neighboring towns, if they're both really good at basketball, play in modern day. But back when this was occurring and when I played in high school, that may not have happened. So it was a good change. They got that done. So they have the Sweet 16. That's what they call it through when you play the Sweet 16 games. The winners of those Sweet 16 games, they go to the final 8 and play in the state tournament. So anyway, let's go back to the chapter. Basketball was always my favorite sport to play in high school. I didn't have as much success on the floor as I would have liked, but some of my best memories are on the hardwood. More on that later. Basketball has a special role in other books I've written. The fictional series I might be best known for features Bureau of Indian Affairs Police Sergeant Charlie LeBeau and is set in Siston, South Dakota. Although the characters of these books are highly fictionalized, they highlight the significance of basketball in a small town. Once again, I buried the lead when it comes to Grandpa. The indelible impression left on me when it comes to the State B tournament in our family reunions in Sioux Falls was the gambling. Grandpa cut loose. Grandpa, being the military man he was, always had short hair, but if he would have had long hair, he would have let it down during tourney time. I wish I was privy to the bar hopping and the unsanctioned betting on the games in which my grandpa, my dad, and Uncle Dan partook. Waking up in the morning and seeing $100 bills held by a magnet on the fridge or just on the counter, winnings from the gambling on the games, is a stark image that still lives in my mind's eye. I was a little kid, and I had never seen large bills like that or significant amounts of cash before. The men often remained upstairs sleeping it off after a long night of celebrating the games and winning wagers. I guess the money was left out in the open for the women to see and maybe pluck off a few dollars for having to put up with the men's bad behavior. Pure speculation on my part. But why not throw in a few 1970 stereotypes for good measure? The women had a chance to go do some shopping in the big city, and a few extra bucks from the night's wagering wouldn't hurt. Such were the relatively simple joys of the olden days. I have frequently mentioned Grandpa's military background. I don't want to give you the idea that he was some uptight stuffed shirt of a man. I would say that you always knew the military bearing was there, just beneath the surface. But in fact, Grandpa was more of a fun-loving guy, enjoyed joking, teasing, and being quick to have a laugh or provide a chuckle. He had fun. No matter how clumsily I might document Grandpa's chronicles intertwined with my own, it has to be reiterated that Grandpa enjoyed life. That's a good lesson to remember. Enjoy life, period. You only get one. For those that might frown on the mention of illicit gambling, Grandpa also had a saying about money. And this is the end quote for the chapter. And this I will wrap it up. And I quote, "It's only money. You can always make more, period." End quote. And that quote's from Edwin P. Hagen Jr., my grandpa. And I will say that that some people might understand what I've written. And I had this note from Gwyneth Duncan. She's my editor, and she had a note on here when I mentioned the word combination military bearing, and she was not familiar with that, and she had put a question mark on the bearing, like, is it military being? But military bearing, and that's just your military character and your attitude and keeping your presence and you'd say keep your bearings about you. There was it's a common it's common vernacular in the military to have military bearing and you know, your posture and just the way you carry yourself and your attitude and everything that goes with being in the military. And one thing I remember when one of the guys when I was when I was first in the National Guard, I was an enlisted soldier in the Army National Guard, and one of the officers was talking about going through officer training school to become an officer in the South Dakota Army National Guard. And he was he made a mistake at one point, and he had to carry around this great big steel uh, orb. Let's call it an orb, but I think it was supposed to be a giant, like a ball bearing. And apparently he had lost his military bearing. So they gave him this, I don't know, it was probably 5-6 pound steel ball that he had to carry around for, for a period of time to remember his military bearing. So I always thought that was pretty interesting training technique to keep your military bearing. So they give you this great big steel ball bearing to carry around and make you aware. I'm sure that gets pretty heavy after a while, carrying just a great big steel ball. So anyway, that's chapter 24 of the State B basketball tourney. Short and sweet. Got that taken care of, and got a couple other things I wanted to mention, including, like I had mentioned, it's February 2nd, and it's Groundhog Day today. And I did see the report that the groundhog, Puxatawney Phil in Pennsylvania, he did make an appearance, and he saw a shadow. His sun was shining, so when you see your shadow as a groundhog, that indicates that there's 6 more weeks of winter, which sure doesn't seem like it here in Santa Fe, New Mexico. It's pretty darn nice. Could be in the mid 50s again today. And went for a walk with the dog. I'm dog sitting. Echo the dog. Took me out for a little walk today, and it was nice and warm. Still need a sweatshirt, but just barely. It's pretty darn nice. So I did hear on the radio station I listened to in the morning that was funny because they were talking about Groundhog Day, and I'd already heard about the groundhog seen its shadow, but I listened to 102.5 Coyote FM. It's classic rock, and the morning DJ was Erica Viking, and she was talking about Groundhog Day, and I think it was 2014 in New York City. And New York City has a similar ceremony that Pennsylvania has with Puxatawney Phil, but they have a groundhog that's name is Charlotte. And when Bill de Blasio was mayor, I think it was 2014, she mentioned that Bill de Blasio, the mayor of New York City, was holding the groundhog. And I say holding because he was holding it, but then he dropped it, and it the groundhog was named Charlotte, later died from the injuries of being dropped by the mayor, Bill de Blasio. So I had forgotten about that, but she reminded me that's so sad, so pathetic. That was a terrible mayor, as I remember it. Just kind of pretty much a communist, an unannounced communist, and now they have a real communist as the mayor of New York City. I wonder if that mayor of New York City, his name is Zoran Mamdani, who's a declared communist in charge of New York City as mayor. It's just, what is the world becoming? Anyway, I'll wait for a report on that instance of the mayor. And wait, I guess I'm seeing something. It looks like the mayor of New York City, Zoran Mamdani, has eaten the groundhog. I think that's one of the traditions where he grew up in Africa. I think he's from Uganda. So I think they eat groundhogs there. And that's the report that's coming out, that the groundhog did see its shadow and was killed and eaten by the current mayor, Zoran Mamdani. These are just unofficial reports, not confirmed yet. Still waiting for confirmation, but I'm reporting that as potential news today. So stay tuned for further updates on Zoran Mamdani eating the groundhog for New York City. So anyway, I did want to mention, that it's funny because in previous chapters, there's things that come up, and as I'm reading them, and then I should stop and make a note and talk about it, but I don't, and then I forget. But I do want to make a couple of notes. And the way this memoir has been written, I'm so far behind. I'm like 4 years behind from when I actually wrote it to when I'm actually publishing it and reading it into the record. But um, in the Saint Christopher Medallion chapter, which is chapter 23, I talked about doing a thorough search, looking for that medal that my grandpa gave me, the original medal, doing a thorough search of the house in Groton, South Dakota, my mom and dad's house there. But that can't be done anymore because that house was sold when my dad passed away in 2021, and my mom sold the house, I think 2 years later? So now that can never be done. Never do a thorough search. Yeah, I mean, in theory, it should have been a thorough search when we were moving stuff out and cleaning it out, but I don't know. Maybe it wasn't there to begin with. So that I should have mentioned that, but I kind of forgot when I was going through and reading the chapter. And then also in the bomber chapter, I think that was chapter 21. I talked about the picture of the bomber, the old Chevy pickup that my grandpa had that I purchased from my grandpa. And it was later sold to Grady, my brother, it was out on his ranch. And there was a picture of this long panoramic picture. It was framed, and it's just a small frame, so big, probably a 16 by 5-inch frame. It's got this panorama of the bomber surrounded by all the cattle, and sitting on my mom's fridge. And again, that's not there anymore. It's written that way. It used to sit on my mom's fridge in the basement at her house, but she sold the house and moved to Aberdeen, and so that's kind of an inaccurate statement, really, in the memoir. But anyway, I'm going to keep this short because I think I hear my dog that I'm dog sitting barking outside. So I probably have to go and check and see what's going on. Hopefully she didn't escape the backyard, because she's in the backyard. And I think if she wanted to, she could just easily jump that fence. And I hope that's not her knocking on my window here. I heard something hit the window. So anyway, that's it. I'm going to shut her down for the day. That's the end of chapter 24, the State B basketball tournament. And that's it. I'm going to sign off and keep it under a half hour. Really short podcast today. This is the shortest one on record for me. So anyway, try to get out on another podcast tomorrow to do chapter 25. I don't know what the name of that one is, but do the podcast because I'm all by myself here. The rest of the family's out in Florida enjoying hopefully warmer weather and Disney World and Universal Studios and such. So should have a whole week of podcasts and get ahead of the schedule on the memoir, Colonel and the Kid memoir. So anyway, that's all right. That's all we got today. I'm going to sign off. So stay positive, take action. You decide, be the glass half full type person. It's a new month. It's in 2026, where January's already passed. It's unbelievable. But anyway, I'll leave you with this. Be assertive, be positive, be proactive. And I sign off. Knock, and the door will be open to you. Seek, and you will find. Ask, and you shall be given. That's it. See you next time, right here on the Colonel and the Kid podcast.